Microaggressions Against Black Women in the Workforce, CUNY Bernard M. Baruch College Marie Della Thomas. How does access to this work benefit you? Let us know. https://academicworks.cuny.edu/bb/117 https://academicworks.cuny.edu. This work is made publicly available by the City University of New York, CUNY, Academic Works at cuny.edu, Thomas 0, copyright by Marie Della Thomas. Racial Microaggressions Against Black Women in the Workforce thesis by Marie Della Thomas, August 16, 2021, Dr. Ryan Subijanto, Advisor Dr. Alison Hahn, Reader, Abstract. This research investigates racial microaggressions against Black American women in the workforce. In addition, this study explores how racial discrimination on the job continues to be problematic for Black American women despite the long fight for racial equality in the past decades. It is common knowledge that all women, in general, must still fight for equal opportunities in the workforce. However, for this research, we will focus on Black American women. Based on survey statistics from this study, with 103 respondents of diverse nationalities, this research results show an uneven distinction in how corporations treat Black American women in the workforce. In addition, interviews conducted for this thesis show that Black women representing a diverse age range dealt with prejudice treatments and share analogous microaggression on their jobs. Therefore, the purpose of this report is to encourage more communication between employers and employees to find answers to the issue of racial microaggression in the office, and to discover coping strategies to help Black women deal with discrimination. Thus, this research aims to outline the problems of racial microaggressions against Black American women in the workforce. Keywords: Black American women, coping, communications, discrimination, racism, sexism. Table of contents. Abstract. 1. Introduction. 2.5 Literature review. 6.12 Research methods. Data collection. 12.15 Analysis. 15.22 Results. Conclusion. 23.24 Works cited. 25.29 Appendix. 30.46 Thomas 1. Introduction. Racial microaggressions against Black American women in the workforce are a hidden crisis in our society. Unfortunately, many people use microaggressions every day without knowing they are. Microaggression events refer to everyday slights targeted at people of a minority or marginalized background. Our society has come a long way with equal opportunity. However, racial microaggressions in the workforce are still very much a problem. Black American women are not exclusive to discrimination in the workforce because women of all races and nationalities usually must work harder to climb the corporate ladder of success in a male-dominated industry. Therefore, most women are victims of some form of microaggression if they work in corporate America. Black women still suffer from racial microaggressions on a high level. For that reason, this research is focused on racial microaggressions against Black American women in the workforce. In addition, this study investigates how Black women should respond to racial microaggressions. Black American women must face issues of diversity on top of inequality. In addition, there is the usual sense of settling related to Black women in business, meaning, Black women should feel thankful they have a good position and do not complain about the microaggressions. Unfortunately, as a result, most Black women choose to be silent to prove they can handle the racial bias, and they do not address the problems for fear of putting their job in jeopardy. This study explores how racial discrimination toward Black American women on the job continues to be problematic. Some Black women see racial microaggressions as part of life because they often deal with racism. Black American women remain silent and do not report the microaggressions to upper management or the human resources on the job. Instead, most Black women will keep the problem inside. After dealing with racial microaggressions, Black women will talk to a coworker, family members, or friends to cope with it, but they will not say anything to their employer because of fear of losing their job. It is common knowledge that women must work extra hard and fight for equal opportunity in the workforce. However, Dr. J. Camille Hall, a professor and associate dean at the University of Tennessee, argues, Black women face the same struggles as white women. However, they have to face diversity issues on top of inequality. Hall 2011, page 1. Often Black women struggle for equal opportunity on the job. However, Black women also face racial discrimination, unlike white women. Thomas 2. Despite the laws passed decades ago to ban racial prejudice, Black American women are still dealing with racial discrimination in the form of microaggressions. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex or national origin. Provisions of this Civil Rights Act forbade discrimination based on sex, as well as race in hiring, promoting, and firing. The Civil Rights Act also required equal rights in public places and employment. This research shows it is still common for Black American women to experience undesirable racial microaggressions on a high level, and corporations often choose to ignore racial discrimination. Stereotypes of Black women work together with racial microaggressions. The study sheds light on the hidden crisis of racism against Black American women in the workplace. This research hypothesizes that Black American women need to be vocal about their experiences with racial microaggressions in the workforce. In addition, corporations should have an inclusion policy that allows minority employees to feel comfortable communicating when dealing with racial discrimination. Microaggressions manifest in the form of racism, sexism, and the feeling of being isolated or excluded in the workforce is the norm for some Black American women. Therefore, author Dr. Jean Camille Hall gives qualitative finds from a study done by 23 focus groups comprised of 963 entry and mid-level Black American women in Fortune 1000 companies. The research revealed that barriers facing Black American women in business include negative, race-based stereotypes. Dr. Jean Camille Hall argues, Black women face the same struggles as white women, however, they have to face issues of diversity on top of inequality. Hall, 2015 p. 2. What does psychologists say about microaggressions? In Psychology, Research of Racial Microaggressions, Dr. Sue said, perpetrators of microaggressions are often unaware that they engage in such communications when they interact with racial ethnic minorities. Sue 2007, p. 1. Racial microaggressions are those sharp words that are spoken directly to the victims to insult them. Black American women have become accustomed to racial microaggressions. Dr. Sue's psychological research became very popular since it brought much attention to the topic of racial microaggressions. Dr. Sue states, in The American Psychologist, that provided a taxonomy of racial microaggressions and a clear direction for researchers to follow. The publication of this paper marks the point when racial microaggressions gained widespread psychological research attention. Racial microaggressions were first defined to explain the race-related slights and indignities Black Americans experienced daily. Sue et al., 2007. Some people are very aware they are using microaggressions and enjoy doing hateful acts. Microaggressions in form of words can do a lot of damage. Thomas 3. In my research I came across an article from West Virginia University. This chart was prepared for athletes who experienced racial microaggression in the sports department to educate them on the stressful effects of microaggressions. The motive was to stop the microaggressions issue in the sports department. American psychologists give a good explanation as to the impact of racial microaggressions and the various kinds of microaggressions. 3 different kinds of microaggression can manifest. Psychologists say racial microaggressions can be manifested in several ways, even when the perpetrator does not know it. Figure 1. Categories of and relationships among racial microaggressions. Sue, 2010, page 29. In the above figure, the chart was designed to explain to students what is microaggressions, and how the impact of racial microaggressions can cause mental stress to Thomas 4, the victims. The figure shows the categories and relationships among racial microaggressions. Sue, 2010, page 29. The chart above gave 3 examples of microaggressions: verbal manifestation, nonverbal manifestations, and environmental manifestations. For example, microaggression can lead to microinsult when the person is verbally rude, microassault when the person uses derogatory language, and microinvalidation when the person talks rudely to a person due to the color of their skin. These are the various forms of microaggressions used on individuals in the workforce. This kind of education on the subject matter of microaggressions is needed. This information would be great for corporations to educate their employees about microaggressions. The chart was created for students involved in the sports program. However, this is good information regarding microaggressions causing stress in the workforce, and the chart shows the impact of the adverse treatment on others. I thought it was a great example of how Black American women should address the issue of racial microaggressions in the workforce. The chart can work for any corporation. It teaches what microaggression is and how racial microaggressions can stress a person so much that it will affect how they perform in sports. Likewise, this kind of chart could be used for any corporation to educate employees to know how the effects of microaggressions could affect the mental health of their workers. Despite their subtle manifestation, researchers found that the stress resulting from chronic racial microaggression experiences can lead to negative biological, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral consequences. Dr. Wing Su states, microaggressions are known to be a chronic stressor and can lead to lower functioning of the immune system. Su, 2010. This study shows how Black American women who experience racial microaggressions could be mentally affected. Black American women who are victims of racial microaggressions can change the narrative of being silent by speaking up and communicating with their employers. Therefore, this investigation found answers to address the racial microaggressions. The racial microaggressions affect the victims mentally. Black American women should respond to microaggressions in the workforce and not ignore the issue. Thomas 5. Literature Review. This literature review explains racial microaggressions and how they are problematic for Black American women in the workforce. In addition, this study reviews biased treatment toward Black women's hairstyles. Microaggressions can manifest in the form of sexism and sexual harassment. The impact of microaggressions can be severe. They can cause individuals to have depression and mental health that could lead to death. This research shows how understanding microaggressions will help determine how they affect victims. In addition, there have been studies on racial microaggressions from different perspectives. All these different perspectives are essential to consider how microaggressions affect Black American women. For this reason, this research is focused on Black American women to show evidence that prejudice still exists in the workforce and to facilitate coping strategies for handling microaggressions on the job. Most importantly, this research will encourage Black women to speak up and address their issues with microaggressions in the workforce. It is essential first to define racial microaggressions to understand this study. Psychiatrist and Harvard University created the term microaggression. Professor Chester M. Pierce in 1970 to define insults and dismissals he regularly witnessed non-Black Americans inflict on African Americans. Wikipedia. According to the Webster Dictionary, a microaggression can be a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group, such as a racial minority. Webster. Dr. Pierce named microaggressions to identify the prejudice act so it can be addressed. Mental health has been linked to microaggression abuse. Dr. Diana Rowe, a licensed clinical psychologist, argues, the phenomena of racial microaggressions has huge implications for minority mental health and societal conflict. Rowe, 2021, p. 1, Microaggressions cause medical issues to the silent victims. This investigation aims to encourage Black women to communicate and address the problem of microaggressions in the workforce. The prejudiced comments in the form of microaggressions toward Black women can be very hurtful and degrading. Dr. Derald Wing Su, a professor of psychology at Columbia University, argues that microaggressions can happen without knowing, and such communications are usually outside the level of conscious awareness of perpetrators. Su, 2010 p. 1. Although perpetrators may be unaware that they used a microaggression, it does not justify targeting the individuals using discriminatory language. In addition, it does not, Thomas 6, stop the microaggressions from harming the victim. However, some perpetrators are very much aware they use racial microaggressions and discriminatory behavior toward Black American women in the workplace. Dr. Derald Wing Su goes further to say, microaggressions are the everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. Su, 2010 p. 1, whether the perpetrator of microaggressions know what they are doing or not. If the insult happens to an individual, it does not justify that the action occurred. Dr. Gianni Lewis, an associate professor in the psychology program at the University of Maryland, argues that racial microaggression is subtle and everyday slights and insults that can include insensitive comments based on an array of racial assumptions about criminality, intelligence, cultural values, and citizenship, as well as the minimization or denial of the racialized experiences of people of color. Lewis, 2016, p. 1. This study explores the everyday verbal behavior that Black American women experience with microaggression and the complexities of communicating with management to prove racial prejudice exists in the workforce. Microaggressions and discrimination are hard to prove. Characterized by verbal insults, microaggressions can be degrading and hurtful to Black women. Victims of racial microaggressions find it hard to prove it because it can be hard to identify it. Dr. Shamika Dalton, professor of legal research at the University of Florida, argues, due to their subtle nature, it can be hard to identify when a microaggression occurs. Dalton, 2018 p. 1. As a result, some Black American women do not want to try to identify the microaggressions or must explain the details of the offense to the authorities to prove they were racially insulted. Corporations need to educate employees on microaggressions and have a policy regarding no tolerance for discrimination in the company. This study explores the everyday verbal behavior that Black women experience in the form of a microaggression and the complexities of communicating with management to prove racial prejudice exists in the workforce. Why are microaggressions toward Black women in the workforce problematic, and how are microaggressions used? In my research, I discovered that racial stereotypes of Black women go together with the verbal racial microaggressions toward Black women. For example, the stereotypes that Black women are angry Black women, so aggressive so, loud so, lazy over, sexed Black American women must deal with a preconception of co-workers. Overcoming the stereotypes against Black women are a large part of the problem. The microaggressions go together with the stereotypes and, Thomas 7, preconceptions of Black women in the workforce. Best-selling author Dr. Janice Gassman-Asare argues part of the problem and the reason why this stereotype persists is a lack of awareness as well as a lack of understanding regarding Black women's experiences. Asare, 2019 p. 1. Black women have a more difficult time dealing with racial microaggressions in the workplace due to being judged by the color of their skin and their sex, as our former First Lady Michelle Obama said. During her final White House interview with Oprah concerning Michelle Obama being labeled an angry Black woman, she states, "Microaggressions about Black women's level of intelligence and gender-driven microaggressions are common. Educated Black women feel they must prove themselves even though they are qualified to do their job. The experience of microaggressions can affect the victim's work ethics." As Janice Gassman-Asare said, part of the problem and the reason why this stereotype persists is a lack of awareness that this stereotype exists as well as a lack of understanding regarding Black women's experiences. Asare, 2019 p. 1. Some of the microaggressions may seem harmless stereotypes on the surface, but as Dr. Derald Wing Su, professor of social work at Columbia says, small slights, however, research indicates they have a powerful impact upon the psychological well-being. Su, 2010, page 1. The little racial slurs can cause many problems. Bianca Barrett, a senior contributor for Forbes Women Business magazine, argues, being a Black woman in the workplace is even harder, because not only are they subjected to gender-driven microaggressions, but they are also subjected to racial ones from both men and women. Barrett, 2020 par. 3. This research helps understand the direct effect and disconnection racial microaggressions have on Black women. Victims need to feel free to communicate to employers, and corporations need to educate employees on problems of microaggressions. A very common microaggression toward Black women in the workforce is the racial bias, especially Black women, and their cultural hairstyles. For example, corporations have a right to request their employees to dress and represent the company in professional attire. However, when companies indicate, "We do not allow women to wear their hair in braids in our office," which is a cultural hairstyle Black women wear, this rule was created directly for Black women. In addition, it is common for Black women to have their co-workers in there. "We are so afraid of each other," she added. Color, wealth, these things that don't matter still play too much of a role in how we see one another. And it's sad, because the thing that least defines us as people is the color of our skin, the size of our bank account. None of those matters. Times, 2008. Thomas 8, office ask, "Can I touch your hair?" Asking to touch a person's hair comes across as very disrespectful and invasive to Black women because a person's hair is a part of their body that should be respected. So, Dr. Jonathan Kante, director of the Center for Science at the University of Washington, argues, some microaggressions, like "Can I touch your hair?" the influence of racial bias is real but small. When the white woman who asked to touch the black woman's hair responds, "I was just curious," she is not necessarily lying. Kante, R. Sep. 20 par. 11. The workplace racial bias will only be dealt with when the victims speak up. However, if the victims do not communicate the problem to their company, how will they know? Victims of racism need to know their worth. They need to realize that they have a voice and that they must speak up to stop microaggressions. The topic of black women and their hair is an old-rooted racial issue that occurs in the workplace. So, the best-selling author Dr. Janice Gassman Asser argues, aside from the sanitary concerns that come with people touching your hair, the act of touching a coworker is wholly inappropriate and unprofessional. Even asking, "Can I touch your hair?" is inappropriate and should be prohibited. Asser, 2020 p1. An offensive microaggression for black American women is "Can I touch your hair?" and it happens too often. Someone letting another person touch their hair on the job is unsanitary. When asked the question, "Can I touch your hair?" most black American women want to say no, but if black women do not say yes, they are stereotyped as the angry black women or hostile. In support of the Black Lives Matter movement, Dove Corporation researched to support the Crown Act to fight against racial microaggressions and discrimination against black women's hairstyles in the workplace. The coalition Crown stands for creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. Dove's survey on hairstyles results showed black American women report being 30% more likely to receive a formal grooming policy in the workplace at both the application and orientation phase, according to new research from Dove 2019, p4. As a result, employees of corporations often quit their jobs when they are asked to by their employer to change their hairstyle. The Crown study consists of 2,000 women, 1,000 black women, 1,000 non-black women, ages 25-64. The results of Dove's surveys showed that black American women are 80% more likely to change their natural hair to meet social norms or expectations at work. Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home because of a hairstyle. This is called racial discrimination. The topic of model minority in the Asian community stood out to me since the stereotypes are akin to black women. Asian women see the title model minority as a Thomas 9. microaggression that causes division among other races. In addition, Asian workers are called token workers. Underlying behind this title is an unspoken attitude that the person should feel fortunate to have their job. The expectation of the so-called model worker is not always optimistic in the Asian community. So, Dr. Margaret M. Chin, Associate Professor of Sociology at Hunter College Graduate Center, argues, the model minority stereotype is the cultural expectation placed on Asian Americans, and some see it as a trap to divide minorities. Although the positive stereotypes help Asian Americans to gain entry-level jobs, Dr. Margaret M. Chin found that Asian American professionals are not trusted, stating superiors did not trust them, perceiving them as forever foreigners who did not belong. Chin 2021, p1. The model minority is the same as black women treated like they do not belong on the executive level. Asian women feel that model minority is a myth. Dr. Gloria Wong, professor, and author at the University of California, argues, many point to the purpose of the argument as disingenuous insofar as it is intended to drive a wedge between different disadvantaged groups. Wong, 2018 p1. Even though Asian women can have the upper hand with the stereotype, the myth is not valid. Black women also often experience the token worker stereotype who should feel honored to have their job because the company must reach equal opportunity status with minority workers. This study shows that racial microaggressions directed particularly to black and Asian women are similar. Microaggressions can manifest as sexism or sexual harassment. Both black women and Asian women share the experience of being stereotyped as minority women, exotic and invisible in the workplace. Expecting minority women to adhere to sexual advances in the form of microaggressions can be translated into comments like, "Is it true what they say about black women?" or "You look exotic today." These are common forms of microaggressions that both black women and Asian women dealt with in history and still to date. In our society today, why are black women victims of racial microaggressions in the workforce? The problem is severe and can affect the mental health of the victims. Dr. Kevin L. Nader of American Psychological Associations argues, there have been numerous studies that demonstrated the negative impacts that racism and racial discrimination may have on individuals' physical and mental health. Nadal, 2011 p1. The treatment that Black and Asian women experience often makes them feel hopeless for change, especially since microaggressions are so commonplace to minority women in general. Microaggressions present special tests for women of color. However, in some cases, microaggressions in the workplace get ignored by management. So Adia Harvey Wingfield, author, professor of sociology, and dean at Washington University in St. Louis, argues. Thomas 10. Race and racism create specific, unique challenges for women of color. However, unfortunately, the microaggressions are too easily ignored with broad platitudes that seek to advance women's representation without questioning which women are most likely to benefit. Wingfield, 2020 p1. Most Black women will attest to dealing with racial microaggressions in the workforce. Ignoring the issue of racial microaggression will not resolve the matter for Black women. Women need to keep communication open. Management will sometimes ignore microaggressions, and it can be disheartening. However, victims of microaggression speak up, which helps to end fear and the tolerance of racism. So, Dr. Diana Rowe is a doctoral limited licensed psychologist argues, it is no secret that our country has a significant history of racism. Some argue that racism no longer exists due to desegregation laws and policy changes, while others argue that racism is still alive. It has just changed its face. Rowe, 2021, p. 1. To uncover microaggressions targeted at Black women will help expose the crisis. According to studies, microaggressions can cause depression and possibly lead to death. The feeling of being left out, treated like a second-class citizen, exoticized on the job, or not considered for advancement in their company due to their race is a familiar problem for Black women. Dr. Kevin Nadal, counseling psychologist, professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, author, and activist, has done extensive research on the impact of microaggression among women of color. Dr. Kevin Nadal argues, few studies have examined the effects of racial microaggressions on traumatic stress. Furthermore, although trauma has been traditionally conceptualized as psychophysiological reactions to life-threatening, Nadal, 2019 p1. Microaggressions can cause Black American women to go into depression because they often hold their feelings inside without communicating with others on the job. In corporate America, most companies still have the trend of a few women of color in upper management, particularly pervasive for Black women who are well represented at entry and middle level management but continue to be underrepresented at executive levels in corporate America despite representing a significant and growing source of talent for corporate institutions. Racism has been cited as a critical factor in explaining the underrepresentation of Black women in senior management in corporate America. Being overlooked for a position can be called a microaggression if Black American women are discriminated against and not considered for a position. Dr. Aisha Holder argues, modern racism, like racial microaggressions, is more likely to be covert, indirect, and ambiguous. With the intersection of their marginalized identities of race and gender, Black women are particularly vulnerable to negative stereotypes that create barriers to career advancement. Holder, 2015 p. 1, Thomas 11. Studies have shown there are 3 good options to take to respond quickly to end racial statements. So, Dr. Ella Washington, an organizational psychologist management faculty member at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business, argues, first, discern what matters to you. Second, disarm the person who committed the microaggression. Explain that you want to have an uncomfortable conversation. Third, challenge them to clarify their statement or action, then focus them on the negative impact. Finally, decide how you want to let the incident affect you. Washington, 2020 p1. Black women must speak up, take control of the impact of microaggressions, respond immediately to the perpetrator, and determine if the microaggression requires them to respond or let it go. Communication is the key element to stop microaggression. Even if it is an uncomfortable conversation, the victims must speak up. Avoiding the problem will not help victims overcome the discrimination. Addressing the crisis of racial microaggressions is the only way to move forward and help minority women overcome this discrimination. As First Lady Michelle Obama said, let us invite one another in. Maybe then we can begin to feel us, to make fewer wrong assumptions, to let go of the biases and stereotypes that unnecessarily divide us. There is power in allowing yourself to be known and heard, in owning your unique story, in using your authentic voice. Obama, 2018, p. 47. Black women not speaking up is a big part of the issue. Communication is the key, and when Black women speak up, it will bring attention to the crisis. Research method data collection. For this research, a mixed methods approach of quantitative survey collection and qualitative semi-structured interviews helped to collect the participants' experience with microaggressions. Thus, this research used methodologies to collect data information about participants' experience with microaggressions on the job. The goal was to measure and compare the level of microaggressions that Black American women experience. First, a survey was designed for participants to collect data of their experience with microaggressions in the workforce. The questions were geared to the various ways microaggressions can affect people. Second, interviews with 4 Black American businesswomen helped to collect data on their experiences dealing with microaggressions. The 4 businesswomen participated in Thomas 12, an online questionnaire, and then the following day, Zoom sessions were given to participants for a face-to-face interview. The interview results demonstrate the similarities and differences between the 4 Black American women to determine the types of microaggressions the 4 women experience on the job. This data information from the interviews helps to measure the level of microaggressions Black American women experience in the workforce. In addition, the diverse sample enabled the research to demonstrate the levels of prejudice aimed toward Black women respondents and comparable microaggressions the respondents experienced. Survey. This survey was information used to gather data from participants on their experience of racial microaggressions in the workplace to measure the difference in employees' experiences from various cultures and measure how the experience of Black women may differ. In this research, the raw data collected from the survey consisting of questions relating to racial microaggressions. The diverse sample collected from the survey enabled this research to demonstrate the levels of prejudice aimed toward Black women and the microaggressions that they have experienced in the workforce. The data collection for this research came from the online survey designed on the Qualtrics platform accessed through a portal for CUNY. The survey received a total of 103 responses. The respondents were multicultural, men and women. To measure the difference between the multicultural respondents' work experience versus Black women experience in the workforce. The link to the online surveys is posted across social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get responses from diverse cultures. The following are examples of the survey questions and answers from the survey. The complete survey questions and answers are found in the appendix. Survey Q4. Have you ever experienced microaggression by a supervisor manager on the job? Answers. 19% answered, yes, I have. 26% answered, no, I have not. 22% answered, too many times. 27% answered, a few times. Therefore, 68% have experienced microaggressions on the job. That is more than half of the respondents. Survey Q11. Minority women are rarely considered for management positions. Thomas 13. Answers. The option of strongly agree 22%. Disagree 15%, neither agree nor disagree 13%, agree 43%, or strongly disagree was only 8%. Therefore, out of the 103 respondents, most respondents agree that minority women are rarely considered for management positions. This answer shows there is a severe need to examine this research further. Based on the data results of the surveys and evidence given in the interviews, this analysis demonstrates the high level of racial microaggressions that individuals experience in the workforce in our society. Survey Q13. Do minority women have the same chance for promotion as other ethnic groups? Answers. The majority felt there is discrimination regarding a minority woman's chances of getting a promotion. 40% of the respondents disagreed, 22% agreed, 16% neither agree nor disagree, 13% strongly, and 10% strongly disagree. This study proves my hypothesis and answers the question that much more research is needed to discuss the crisis of microaggressions against Black women. Communication is necessary to fight against racism. Interview. The interview questions were designed to gather data on the 4 women's experiences with microaggressions on the job and to message the experience of racial microaggressions. Woman 1 is a marketing manager for a small business in New York City. Woman 2 is a business administrator for a large hospital in New York. Important note, Woman 2 is a 30-year-old who have obtained her MBA. However, due to her youthful look, she deals with racial microaggressions and age discrimination and comments about her intelligence level. Woman 3 is a hospital administrator in New Jersey. Important note, Woman 3 is approaching retirement after working at the hospital for 21 years. However, she still experiences microaggressions and discrimination on the job. Women 4 is a nurse in a large hospital located in Hampton, Virginia. The interview questions were used to gather data on the 4 women's experiences with microaggressions. Thomas 14. The following are a few examples of the interview questions. The complete interview questions are found in the appendix. Interview question 1. Have you experienced racial discrimination in the workplace? Interview questions 3. Did you consider leaving because of racism? If so, explain. Interview question 4. As a black woman, do you feel you have equal opportunities to advance at your place of work? Interview question 10. What was the worst microaggression you experienced on the job? The interviews were done via Zoom. 30 minutes for each interview. Some of the women initially felt reluctant about doing the interview. However, I explained to the women that their identities would be kept confidential. The women felt more comfortable sharing and being transparent about their experiences with microaggressions on the job. Data analysis. My analysis of the survey is that communication is the primary issue with Black American women and microaggressions. Based on this study, racial microaggressions against Black women are still high in our society. The results of 103 respondents of diverse nationalities and the interview data from 4 Black women show the uneven and tremendous distinction in how the Black female respondents are treated at work. Corporations must develop programs to allow their workers to feel comfortable speaking without fear of losing their employment. The survey design is according to the following variables. The assessment consisted of 28 multiple choice questions regarding the workers' experiences with microaggressions in the office and how respondents felt Black American women are treated in the workforce. In addition, the survey questions designed to measure the impact it has on Black women. The response to the survey demographics were women and men of different cultures. In addition, the respondents identified in 3 areas of age, race, and gender. Age of respondents. 25% of the respondents were between the age of 18-24. 30% of the respondents were between the ages of 25-34, 45% of respondents' ages were 35 and up. This survey participants' age groups spanning from 18 years of age to 54 and over. Thomas 15. Race of respondents. 34% of respondents were white, 30% of respondents were Black African American, 18% of respondents were Hispanic Latino, 7% of respondents were Asian Pacific Islander, 1% of respondents were Native American or American Indian. Furthermore, 9% of respondents were of other ethnics. Finally, 1% of respondents preferred not to say their race. Gender of respondents. Female respondents skewed heavily at 70%, and the remaining 30% male. The survey questions were sent out to a diverse audience, including men and women, to measure the responses of men and women of other ethnic groups. The objective was to measure the number of microaggressions. For example, Black women receive in comparison to other nationalities and races. In addition, the goal of this research was to find out how other workers see and witness microaggressions in the workplace and how they feel toward prejudiced behavior. Below are a few charts from the survey conducted for this research. The survey consists of 28 questions distributed in April 2021. The questions were sent to the respondents online via Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and a personal link. The appendix presents all the data extracted from the survey. The following charts are a brief overview and analysis of the survey results. Survey, Q4. The bar chart above reflects the percentage of respondents that have experienced a racial microaggression in the workplace. The survey shows that racial microaggressions are very common in the workforce. Thomas 16. Survey, Q11. The bar chart above reflects the percentage of respondents who felt that women are rarely considered for management positions. The results show how microaggressions hinder the opportunity for women to get management or higher positions in a company. This bar chart shows how microaggressions affect people negatively and jeopardize the opportunity for bright women to progress and contribute to the company. Survey, Q1. The bar chart above reflects the percentage of people afraid of losing their job addressing racial discrimination. The choice of answers was the following. 23% of the respondents strongly agree, 42% agree, 22% was neutral, 9% disagree, 4% strongly disagree. Therefore, the results show that most people are afraid of losing their jobs, so they chose not to communicate when dealing with microaggressions in the workplace. Emotions are needed to address microaggressions, and if people are not calm, they will be afraid to speak up. Black women need to feel comfortable letting their leaders know about the microaggressions. This bar chart shows us that most black women are afraid of losing their jobs, so they remain silent when experiencing a microaggression. In the above bar chart, survey Q1, the bar chart shows the high percentage of respondents agree on the scale, but 42% of the respondents acknowledge they are afraid. These, Thomas 17, 19 of 48, footer handle.